All right. Okay, so I'm gonna set this thing up. Well, I typically would set up a guitar if somebody brought this to me, which they did. To set up, they want to set up on this. I'm probably gonna make another saddle just because I want to show making saddles, and then the guy can have an actual bone saddle. And,
Is that one plastic?
this, yeah, it's plastic. It's probably the same material that Graph Tech puts out. It may be a Graph Tech, I don't know. Yeah, Tusk, TUS or something like that. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, if this guitar came into the shop, I would evaluate it and figure out what we've got going on with it, and if it actually needs something. He says it's hard to play, and it is. It's hard for me to play. And so he wants a lower action. That's just, and then I hear that all the time. I hear as low of an action as possible. It's just like it's. And just to give y'all an example here, guitars weren't necessarily built to play as low as we're playing them today. I mean, if you look at old Martin specs, it's some of them are like 1/8 of an inch off of the fingerboard, with any from all the way to 15 thousandths relief in a neck. I mean, low action wasn't invented until the 70s, and according to Bill Collins. And so, with that said, everybody wants their guitar to play good and play with low action, so we try to accomplish it. We do that with trying to make sure fretwork's as perfect as it can be. I mean, used to it didn't have to be that perfect because, you know, your saddle was so high that you were missing everything in front of it. So with that said, we're going to try to get this one as low as we can. We have, and I'm going to read out everything either in thousandths of an inch or in 64ths when I do this.
What do thousandths like? How many thousandths is like a quarter of an inch? Or does that?
Well, let's find out.
Oh, really? All right.
What is it, Jim?
250,000.
Oh.
Yeah, a quarter of an inch is going to be 250.
You're good.
Like a 64th is a 0.0156, so we're going to say close to 16 thousandths of an inch is a 64th. Or 16 mils, apparently you can refer to it as mils. I've always called it thousandths. So we're at 8/64 to 5/64.
What is that tool in your hand?
All right, yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you.
And you're measuring 12th fret, right?
I'm measuring at the 12th fret. That's where I'm measuring. Where's it?
Let's get a close-up.
All right.
Okay,
this
hold
is-
still. There you go. Everybody see that?
Action.
Yeah, string action gauge.
All right.
On the back of it,
Had it a long time, they were around.
Eye chart.
on the back of it, it has a fractional, decimal, and metric chart. 5 years ago, my wife gave me the okay to have that tattooed on my arm. So, I really do want to have that done, but
You wouldn't want to tattoo it anyplace else.
prior to that, she's like, no, that's done. Finally, she's like, whatever. Anyway, I can pass this around. Stu Mac sells these. That's going to be the most expensive place to buy it. You can buy, Diodario makes them. If you save your packs of strings, you can get one of these for like probably 12 packs of strings if you save the codes. You know, so Diodario.
Staff's book.
Yeah, and then you can find them on Amazon anywhere from like $4 or $5 up to $10. I think Stu Mac probably sells them for $20.
What is the name for that?
String action gauge. You can go to Amazon and just tap in string action gauge.
But the ones on Amazon are made in China.
Wash it first.
Yeah.
So you get the who hangs.
So those come in handy. They have thousandths of an inch going up. I'm gonna pass this around. And anytime we take a break, if you wanna come up here, rummage through, look at stuff. That's my goal, is for everyone to get familiar with this stuff, find things that you don't have, that's like, oh wow, that's great, I want that. So, we're gonna check the neck relief. Now normally, I have a relief gauge that looks like this, that measures from the first fret, has a plunger that hits the 5th fret, and then has another ledge that sits on the 12th fret. So what I'm trying to do is read the neck within thousandths. So none of you probably have this kind of gear, so that's fine, because we've lived our lives without it for forever. I mean, these are new inventions that are just like, oh, it makes your life easier, because if you're doing this all day long, you don't want to have to get feeler gauges out and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that, anybody have a capo in their case that they brought today? Can I borrow your capo? I'd love to. That way I can show you how we do this without fancy gauges. If you're setting up your own personal guitars, you probably don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on gauges. These are poorly because they're new. These are feeler gauges. I've just bought 2 new sets because I'm bad with feeler gauges. I'll use them for all sorts of stuff. I'll pull them out, and shove them under braces, and they get kinked up, and yeah, so I've used them. Now I've got a new set, and I love them. Let's see if I can make it through this class without abusing it. All right, so with feeler gauges, you can start. Everybody's familiar with feeler gauges, correct? Okay. Automotive feeler gauges. These start out at 2/1000ths of an inch and just go up 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jump up to 8, 11, 12. Did they not give me a 10,000th of an inch? That's odd. Anyway, so we're going to measure this neck using that capo. Feeler gauges. So I'm going to capo that first fret. All right. And then I'm going to press down at the 12th fret. Now your string here is going to be forced to be in a straight line, like a level.
Is that why I put the capo on?
That's why I put the capo on. I mean, I could press here too and then try to do it, but I'd have to so capo is like my third hand. And you can hear this relief in there because you don't hear that? I can tap the string, so we know that the string's not laying flat on the frets. You can tap it and you can hear it. So I'll take my feeler gauges, and since my gauge is going to be measuring at the 12th fret, then I'm going to measure this at the 12th fret and see if we're close to it. I'm going to measure it first when it's on its back because it's easy to show. But a neck relief is different on a guitar when it's in playing position than when it's on its back. Your tuners and all that stuff is going to play a role in that neck going back. And it's usually maybe 1/1000th of an inch or 2/1000th of an inch. At the end of the day, it's not going to change the world, but typically if I'm going to play a fingerboard or something like that, I'm going to try to make sure I'm as accurate as I possibly can be. A lot of times when I do fret work, I use a neck jig. Oh, go ahead.
Even when it's clamped in the vise?
Yeah, the vise will change it too sometimes. You know, you got to be careful. Sometimes I'll end up clamping a neck, and then I'll have it like that, and then I'll drop the guitar and not notice, and then the guitar actually just fell this way, and then the next, it's actually giving me a fake reading. So a lot of times when I read a neck, if I'm gonna read it while it's flat, I'll take it off. I'll just let my device spin in a little bit. I'll put it there. If you're at home and you're using a neck rocker, just put it in the center of the neck. You can read it while it's flat. If you're using feeler gauges, those gauges, and you can do it too while it's up, but this is a lot more accurate because I can hold it, turn the guitar up, see what changes. And we'll see if this guitar changes versus it's on its back or when it's not. So then I can press at the 12th fret, and I'm trying to slide the feeler gauge over the 7th fret.
And you're measuring to the fret, not to
From the
fret
bottom
number?
of the fret, the top of the fret to the bottom of the string.
Okay.
I'm pressing at the 12th fret here because that's where I'm going to, well, on this one it's going to be closer to the body, so the 14th. So I'm going to press at the 14th. In my shop, I'm used to normally doing, like I said earlier, 1st to the 12th and measure at the 5th because the gauge that I bought measures that. That's the only reason.
So you're doing 14th and measuring at 7th now, is that right?
Yeah, today I'm gonna do that. And see, I can fit that 6 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge underneath there without it touching the string.
Do you recommend we do it where it meets the body? Like, why did you say you do it at the 12th fret at shop? Versus
That's because when I bought the gauge, that's what the StewMac sells. I know that it's really only going to be maybe 1/1000th of an inch difference in those two spots. So as far as the playability and the feel, it's going to be pretty darn close to the same. I just want to be consistent with the two gauges that I'm going to use.
Well, if you go beyond the 14th, you're in that fall off.
Yeah, your rod typically is only going to work from where you're from the nut, or from about the 1st fret to the where it meets the body. You know, past that, it's not really going to do anything. So we're going to try with an 8 thousandths. And I feel a little drag there. And then,
What do you mean by drag?
meaning that I can feel the feeler gauge,
touchy?
Touching.
yeah, just start to touch. So I'm going to say that's going to be right there at 8 thousandths. I'm going to try to get as close to that as possible. And before I do anything, I'm going to zero this out. Make sure nothing's changed.
So you measured 8 thousandths there. Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
That's, okay, 8 thousandths. I'm reading 8 thousandths relief. Now that's on the low E side because that's where I'm measuring. You'll find some guitars have relief on one side and it's different on the other side and it's different in the middle of the neck. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. It doesn't mean that there's a warped neck or anything like that. If this is a vintage Martin, it's got a compound radius. They didn't do compound. Before we go on a compound radius, we'll talk about it, what radiuses are. So your radius is looking at the curvature of your fingerboard. Like if you cut the neck off here, how the frets round this way, that's going to be your radius. A vintage Martin is going to have a 16 radius typically at the nut, and it is going to slightly flatten out to a 20 by the end of the board. Typically, newer Martins, no, they'll be consistent throughout. Reason that was is when Martin, from my understanding, when they would plane a board, and when I say plane a board, that means true in a board with a level like this. I mean, I've got a fancy one that's a 12 all the way down, 12 radius, which wouldn't help me out on a Martin. This is what I built, you know, a cheap way to do it. When I first started out, I was making fingerboard levelers, so we'll refer to them as that. And this is the newest thing. When they would plane a board, they would put two 12-pound bags of buckshot on each shoulder of the guitar, and that would simulate string tension. And they would have the headstock clamped into another vise. Put your buckshot there, it would force the neck as if it had string tension, and that's where they were gonna roll with it. So that was as scientific as it got. And when they would plane the board, true the board, with if you were gonna use a block level like this, and this was no nut, no frets, they would follow the path of the string, meaning that when you're on this side of the board, it's gonna, if this is looking down at it, and that's your fingerboard, and it tapers off. Excuse the drawing, but your string follows this path. It centers up in the neck and in the middle. So you're planing, you're truing like this, and then you follow the path of the strings. And that's gonna just naturally give you a compound radius, meaning that it starts off with a radius at one end, and then it flattens out to a radius at the other end. Now, most guitars, like Gibsons and Fenders and almost all makes, unless you get into, your Jacksons and Kramers, because you've got an advantage to having a compound radius. You have a compound radius, then you can take a guitar and bend the string higher without buzzing. And the reason a compound radius allows you to do that is, imagine when you bend a string, let's say that's the end of your fingerboard, you're looking down. Like the guitar that I showed, the truss rod's at the end right here, and you're looking down, and that's the string, and you just cut that. If you try to bend this up, it's gonna hit, because it's got it down here where your bridge is. That's the pivot point. So when you bend, and that's your fret wire, it's gonna bottom out on your fret wire up here. Does that make sense? So imagine if this radius was dead flat. Then you don't have that problem. When you bend it up, it's not gonna hit the fret up here. It's not gonna choke out. So you got all these blues players, all these years playing on these vintage tellies with a 7 1/4 radius. That's huge. It's a big radius. That means the whole circle is, a 7 1/4 radius there. That's how big the circle is. So they would choke out, so they were always forced to have such a high action. And compound that with the fact that you got, what I was talking about over here, when you have a rising tongue, so then you got a rising tongue and a radius that goes. So when you get these electric guitars and you try to bend them and they choke out, you got two things that are going against you. So the 7 1/4 has much more radius than like a Gibson, like a 12. All right, now the advantage to having more radius is it's comfortable for the hand. You can, it rounds naturally with your body, so when you fret it, it feels good. And when it's flat, we've all played on classical guitars, they're not inviting, you feel, you get used to it, but it's flat. So the more radius that you have, the comfortable it is, but the more radius you have, the more buzzing you're going to have when you start to do bends. So if you're a player that never bends, you can have a big radius, a nice arch. If you're bending all the time, you're going to want something that's flatter. So that's where the compound radius comes into play. I mean, it started with Fender was making 7 1/4, and then they started to make 9 1/2 to help with that situation. So they were trying to get the best of both worlds, enough rounding for the chord players and flatten it out. Gibson just went straight 12. And it's like, we're going all in, we're gonna flatten this out. Martin, I don't think they ever planned any of that. They were just playing with the path of the string, which makes sense. If I'm playing a bass fingerboard on an upright bass, then I go to the path of the string. And if you notice, those don't have the same radius. Those are compound radiuses. So, and we'll get into issues with and how to make electric, because I got some electric guitars here, how to make them play better down here, even if you don't have a compound radius. So, with that said, we want to adjust this rod, and you asked earlier, is 8,000 is good? Well, 8,000 is fine. A manufacturer spec for most guitars is going to be 10 thousandths to 12 thousandths of an inch. I personally, and this is a preference, it's 5 thousandths of an inch if I can get away with it. A truss rod will change the tone of the guitar. In some guitars I can't hear it, some guitars I can. It's fun if you have a guitar that has an adjustable rod down here. Take a wrench like this. Put that wrench on your truss rod. Have somebody that you trust turn that rod slightly
While you're playing?
while you're playing and listen if you're getting tone difference. Now here's the reason why. Fretting makes a difference in the tone of the guitar. How you put your frets in the guitar is a big deal. And again, I'll sit there in bed at night and try to figure out why. Why does that 70s Martin sound good now when after I fretted it? I just put frets in it. I mean, I didn't change anything with the body. Well, it makes a big difference. Fretting also affects your truss rod because imagine when you fret a guitar, and this will get me back to when I'm talking about tone. We'll talk about some of the techniques of fretting and why I think fretting is so important. There it is. All right, so again, we're looking at the side of our fingerboard right here. We draw this really big. We have a slot. We just magnified a fret slot, okay? There's the back of the neck. There's the fingerboard. All right. So a fret is going to be shaped like this. You have your fret, it comes in, it has a tang, then it has a bar. All right. That's what we call a T fret. T frets are forgiving. I mean, within reason. If you've ever fretted a guitar, you know it's a pain, or it can be. This is going to drop down into your slot, and those barbs are going to catch the wood. So, prior to T frets, we had bar frets. So that whole fret would look like this, and that's it. It's just a square piece of metal, and it came square. You had to round this over on your own. Now the beauty of that kind of fret versus a T fret, because when you put a T fret in a guitar, you inevitably end up with this. It goes in, the tang comes down, and we have these barbs that stick in and hold it in, okay? So we got an air gap here, we got air gaps here. So that's not necessarily a problem, but you've got all these gaps here. You've got this space right here that eventually may compress. So let's say in a 70s Martin, they even had a little more gap there, it seems like, from what I noticed. So those necks would, as the guitar would age and sit there with string tension, it would keep pressing until this would get closer to the tangs here. So that slot would essentially kind of do this, out like this, because it's compressing over all those. And so if you compressed all that in, then that neck gets a bow in it. And the guitar may start sounding better when it gets a bow in it. Because I've noticed that back to when you talking about the truss rod, you'll notice your guitar might sound bigger, louder, and have a better tone when you back off your rod, because it's going to introduce relief in the neck. If you've got gaps there, it'll start pressing harder on your tank. So imagine if your body resonates, and then we call these rubbery necks, a lot of 70s Martins. That body resonates, and then that vibration goes down the neck, and then it's all kind of rubbery. You lose this circle of tone, I guess you can get, this vibration, and it kind of just goes this way and just dissipates. And then it never really makes a full circle and come back. So they start to feel lively, they start to have a better tone. There's tricks that you can do to make a guitar hopefully sound better when you fret it. Compression fretting is one. Actually gluing the frets in, that would be another one. We'll go.
Fish glue for that again?
Yeah, there's like, I use generally 3 to 4 different kinds of glue depending on what it is. And I'm gonna go into all that because I'm gonna fret. Well, this will be a good experiment because I'm gonna fret my guitar with multiple kinds of glue. So we'll see what happens. And we're gonna do it on a 66 Gibson. And so here's how I pictured it. It puts more stress on the neck. It gets more rigid. You know, when you compress all that, the neck's gonna get more rigid. All that goes. A picture, if you're gonna stand there holding a, and this goes for neck sets too. I think a lot of times guitars sound better when they need neck sets. I think it puts more stress on the guitar, which makes it vibrate more. Imagine if I was gonna stand here and I had a rope attached to a cinder block, and imagine I'm the neck angle, and my body's the neck that comes off of the guitar this way. If I stand there and hold that cinder block and lean back, it's easier for me to hold than if I go this way and then try to hold it that way. So imagine if that neck angle changes and it goes this way, all this is just, you know, just being compressed hard, which makes everything vibrate more, you know. So that's what I think as far as why fretting, neck angle, and all that does play a role. Now, it's just pointless to have a guitar that needs a neck reset and don't do it because it's unplayable. So, you know, some people would say, well, what if the tone of the guitar changes? Well, it's fine if it changes. If you don't want it to change, then leave it without a neck set, but no one's ever going to play it. So, you know,
No tone.
you know, there's no tone at all, definitely. All right, so now I'm gonna, we said what, 8 thousandths?
So, say you got a brand new build, right?
Uh-huh.
There's no frets on that thing, you want to check the relief. Alright, so when you put frets into that thing, you're gonna necessarily kind of spread those fret slots out a little bit, so is that enough to change that relief at all? So, I guess my question is, what's the sequence of events? So you check the relief, you true up the fretboard, you plane it, then you put the frets in, and you check the relief again.
Yeah, you'll see me when I do this guitar, I'll have when I fret it, I'm gonna check this with no frets.
Okay.
And then what I'll do then is I'm going to put one in probably at the 10th and the 1st. And then the next one I'll put in is gonna be 7th. So I'm gonna check it. And I'm gonna see where I'm going with it. Now, the beauty of it is in a lot of guitars you've got a double action rod. What I'm gonna be doing, I won't have a double action rod. But I want some travel there in my truss rod. You know, so like if I know that I'm going to have a neck that's got, like if I need to pull relief out of a neck, like I got a rod completely bottomed out, and then I want to save that travel with the rod, I'll make a decision based on where I need to go to plane it and where I need to set the rod. So I'll go through some of that when we get into fretting. But yeah, you're exactly right. It changes depending on when you fret. Usually 3 thousandths of an inch, 4 thousandths of an inch at most. I've done some heavy compression to try to straighten out Martin necks before that don't have adjustable rods. And typically, the most I've ever gotten one out of fret wire is straightening one about 5 to 6 thousandths of an inch. which is pretty good. I mean, if you've got a neck that's 15 thousandths of an inch, which is way too much relief I consider for a neck, pulling 5-6 thousandths out puts you back in the range of, you know, of not having a plain Brazilian rosewood board, like a thin one. I still prefer to plane the board if I can, but some of the guitars I get these days, you know, just don't. I mean, I had a Nick Lucas that I had to do fret work on, and it's just like, okay, we're gonna put bigger frets in it, and then actually dress everything out of the fret and touch that board. You know, but that's when you're getting into people buying things for as much originality and not touch, you know, because someone's gonna pay $20,000 for a guitar, then they get a little crazy. I don't know why you would. Does anyone here own a $20,000 guitar that they pay that much for? I don't want to be cutting anyone down. All right. Well, look at that. I guess y'all can't see it. Let's see if I can flip it around the other way. All right, so I'm reading, I was off. I'm reading 9 thousandths of an inch. With the feeler gauge, I was reading 8. So I was only 1 thousandth off, which is good.
Is that negligible?
I don't think I would be able to feel it. So that's pretty good. That means that with feeler gauges, you don't have to go spend $150 on a tool.
Yeah, with the feeler gauge, you were measuring off the top of the frets, and with that, you measured off the fingerboard though.
Yeah, without banking on the fact that this neck is matching the frets. Otherwise, with that other gauge, I'd be measuring off the top of the frets. So yeah, it could be the frets thousandths of an inch off. But it's probably me not having a feeler gauge that reads 9,000, it goes from 8 to 11. So.
Can you like double up on feeler gauges?
Yeah, you can double up on feeler gauges.
Okay.
We're gonna use feeler gauges to keep everyone from sliding their nut too far in a little bit. You know, that's always a big concern when you're setting up guitars. I mean, I'm gonna start following my nut slot. I inevitably go too low, and we all do it. I mean, one of my guitars over there, the nut slot's too low. I go, it's not from where? You know, it's from me not pulling up the feeler gauges, me just going, I gotta get this done. I gotta get my stuff out of the way and get back to something else. And so hopefully I'll have time to put a new nut on it. All right, so we're 9 thousandths. As a rule of thumb, I like 5 thousandths of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this rod and try to get about 5 thousandths of an inch in there. I'm also gonna go ahead and flip it up on this way and measure again right around that same spot. All right, so now when I'm in closer to playing position, I'm reading 7.5, 7, rocket, yeah, about 7. So I was reading 9 with this when it was on its back, which makes sense, because when I press it here, that bias may be pushing the neck forward a little bit. So I've got less relief now. So then I'm going to adjust this rod. That should be a 5mm wrench. Martin's got on their adjustable rods. This is one that goes deep into the body, and they also have a few years there. It was shorter. I don't think I even brought one of those. It was about. It only goes about that far into the body. So some of your Martins you're going to have to buy a long wrench, 5mm. I keep the ball end on this one. I got another one that doesn't. If it doesn't feel tight, then I abandon ship on the ball ends. They're nice because it helps you find the hole quick. I'm not a big fan of ball end wrenches. This is the one that Stu Mac sells. Eventually I'll probably end up just grinding them all off. It's easy to mess up a nut there with a ball and wrench. That's how all those fender nuts get stripped, because they're tiny.
I assume that they're not standardized across the industry.
Hmm?
They're, like the wrench size isn't standardized, like Gibson might use a different size. than-
Oh, yeah, they all use different sizes. Of course, they want a big collection of wrenches. Gibson's gonna be 5/16, Martin's are 5 millimeters. Most of your modern day guitars are switching over to 4 millimeter. Some of those Canadian guitars, and it might be LMI, it's 3.5. What'd you have in your parlor, Jim?
I think it's 3.5 small.
Where'd you get that rod from?
Illinois.
Some of those LMI wrenches, or LMI rods would be 3.5.
What are those hot rod, truss rod?
4 millimeter now. When they started out, when I was building guitars, they used to be 1/8 of an inch, like a Fender. And then they're 4 millimeter. And then of course you can get the one that looks like an old Fender style Phillips head that you see on the vintage ones. And then the spoke nut. You all saw that spoke nut, how you don't have to have a wrench, you just have to have something that will fit in the hole that you turn it. Which is very handy, because when your guitar is sitting like this and something happens, you're playing at a bar and you've been on the road or whatever, you don't have that many tools, you can find almost anything to stick in there and turn your rod. You don't have to have a bunch of crazy tools. I mean, I figured out I really like to do what I do now. I mean, I know a lot of this stuff because I used to play in bands and we tour around the country. And I've started to figure out that my favorite part of the night was getting to the bar, unloading equipment, and working on it. But I missed being home. I would get homesick, and I just couldn't wait to get back into the shop. And then I would annoy everybody in the van because I would sit back there and I would chip carve. And I didn't realize how important chip carving is to woodworking, because once you get used to learning how to use a blade, chip carving things, it's a huge asset. So. And that's a fun thing to get into. You get some basswood, you get a book on chip carving. It doesn't matter what your chip carvings turn out to be, it's just the fact that you're getting used to using the blade in different directions and not slicing yourself with it. So it's a huge asset. As far as control, as far as carving in certain parts of your neck here, when you're carving necks, or even when you're having to shape a piece to fit somewhere in guitar repair. I'm gonna be hoarse by the end of this day. All right, so I think I turned that rod while I was talking, so we're gonna check it again. I'm gonna go to 5/1000 because that's what I typically have a preference for. So now I'm running right around 4.5, 5/1000 of an inch. And for giggles, we're gonna see what that changed us, if any, at the 12th fret.
That was at the 7th?
Yeah, I was measuring, I think right around the 6th fret. I'm putting this at the body every time, so I'm right behind the 6th fret, about the center of the neck. So, your measurements want to be taken right around here. I would be a lot more consistent, and I will be tomorrow when I pick up my tool that I always use, and then we'll go there. But you're talking within this range, so it's going to be 1 to 1,000th of an inch. You want to try to measure the same place every time. And usually measured on frets too, because if I'm not refretting it, I really care about where the frets are sitting. So it's all going to be fine there, because these are, pretty much dead right here on this neck. All right, so I'm losing my spot. 5/1000 of an inch. I've got it set right around 5/1000 of an inch. And when we started out, we were what, 8/64s. There it is. 8/64s. 5/64 at the 12th fret. That's horrible. All right, now we changed that neck 0.4 of an inch at that spot.
How much did you have to tighten that rod?
I tightened that rod from this point to that point. So, not a quarter of a turn, about an eighth. And I gained, in this neck, I gained 0.4.
Is that about standard, you would think?
That's usually standard for about that much, with a Martin. Some guitars are different. So now we're measuring 7/64 to 4/64. And that was only changing the neck 0.4 of an inch. Can you write that down? So now, this is at the 12th. But 7/64 to 4/64. And my goal is, for this player, is to get to 3/32, or we're gonna say 6/64. So we keep everything at 6/64. So, next thing I'm gonna do is check the nut. So I adjusted the rod, because see, I can move the rod back and forth. I don't really want to adjust much of the saddle if I don't have to, although I really don't care how tall his saddle is. I'd like it to be a shorter saddle, but that's probably not going to be an option on this guitar.
Why not adjust the truss rod a little further? Why would we not give it another turn, or no?
Well, if we could, and we can try it and see how it plays. I'm going to start at 5,000, I'm going to check the nut. I suspect I made him play for me, and he was heavy-handed. So I know I'm probably not going to want to run a dead flat neck. Cause see, if I go probably another 3 or 4/1000 of an inch, I probably will be fine, and just be done. But he may experience some buzzing, and I suspect that he would. If he was a really light-handed player, probably not. All right, so this is a fun gauge. All right, I bought that from LMI. This is how I check nut heights. I can check my my height at the 12th fret too. I don't feel like this is accurate, and I'll explain that why. These are expensive. They're probably $100, $125. Now what I found was that this is actually just a tire tread checker that they buy, and then they make a plate to keep, and so the business end is down here, and we'll pass this around so everybody can see it. And so I've got 2 other ones in the shop that I bought on Amazon for less than $20, about 15 bucks. And then one of them that I gave a buddy, I took these off. I went to, you know, those little kits that you can get at like Hobby Lobby that you can make a mold and make little plastic pieces for like model cars or railroads. I made one of those, and I took these off of there, made a cast of it, and then would pour the, you know, and then that way I could fit them with these. And the first one I made by just taking a piece of plexiglass and cutting whatever I needed to, and then mounted it onto the end of it. And you have to open it up and take the spring out. But there's some screws on the back. You take the spring out, and that'll let that just drop. Now what this does is I get to use it for all sorts of things. Let's say I want to say, hey, what fret height is this? Because it needs a refret. I want to know exactly what they got in this guitar. I can put it on the guitar, not on a fret. I can turn it on. I can zero it out, and then I can move it over and put it on the fret. And what are we measuring? 39. 39 thousandths of an inch. I can check it down here to see if it's any different. It's 40 right there.
And is that going, and so it's sitting on two frets and measuring to the fretboard? Is that what it's doing?
What it's doing is these 2 points are sitting on the fretboard, and the plunger there is hitting the fret.
Okay.
And so it's showing you how high something is. So I can put it on a nut slot, and then, so the string's underneath there. So now I'm on top of the string, and I can zero this out, and then I can press. And I'm reading, 17? I can't see it from over here.
Yeah, 18.
So that, now I know that string is 17 to 18 thousandths off of that fret. So we know our action there. From doing this, what I prefer at a guitar like a Martin would be the nut height being like 18 thousandths, 18 and 19, we'll say 19 to be on the safe side, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, and 14, all the way down, just tapering down 1/1000th of an inch. In a perfect world, I mean, we're talking about you've got to manage to slide it and then hit that, but let's just say that's something to shoot for. With a neck relief of 5/1000ths of an inch, and then ending at the action that you want, the 12th fret. Then your rod, you can adjust it as needed. So that's what I usually shoot for.
You can do that with feeler gauges also, right?
Yes, you can do that with feeler gauge too. You can slide a feeler gauge into there and feel. So you don't have to have a fancy tool. This just makes life so much easier. Stu Max sells a version of this that has an actual dial indicator. Again, come to find out, that's just a tread checker for a car. And then you just have to modify it some.
And what you measured was the height of the string above the fret? The 18 thousandths, what was that?
That's the gap between the bottom of the string and then the top of the fret.
Okay.
Our frets, not that we really need to know that right now, it's 40 thousandths tall when it began life. That one that I measured was 39 because it's bending it. You know, frets are soft. You can, I've even taken a razor blade before, hold it on 2 frets that were one's high, and scrape that fret and shade it down with a razor blade. I mean, with the razor blade standing straight up like a scraper blade. And that's how soft frets are. I mean, it's they call them nickel silver, but there's no silver in it. It's going to be nickel, copper, and zinc, I believe. Not a whole lot of zinc. And 18% nickel. That's what you usually hear. Then you have stainless steel frets, which is a whole nother beast, you know. We'll just measure the fret width. I'm gonna say it's 80 thousandths wide. And I'm measuring 79. So that would be your standard, what companies sell is a 80 thousandths wide fret wire about 40 thousandths tall. And it's usually pretty consistent. Sometimes I'll be a few thousandths off. We'll talk more about what really goes on with a piece of fret wire when we start fretting a guitar and prepping a slot for that. All right, so before I do anything, I want to try to get that. I want to bring that. Check my nut. Nut reads different when it's this way versus when it's on its back. So 23 thousandths of an inch is what I'm measuring on the low E. 20 thousandths on the A. 17 on the D. 14. So we know we won't be messing with 14. Back up to 18. And back down to 14.
And just for clarification, you said in a perfect world, what, 18 graduates?
Yeah, 18 to 19, starting at that and just going down, 1,000ths. So if we had 18, 17, 16, 15. We're already at 14 on the G. And see, if we straighten that now, if we take this neck and straighten it, we would just say, let's pretend we wanted to go dead flat with it. That G string at that point will probably be closer to 10 thousandths of an inch. And so a heavy-handed player is gonna pick that string and it's gonna buzz. It's not gonna touch the fret in open position, but it's gonna probably swing and tap the top of that fret. Because when you straighten that neck like this, that string gets closer. That makes sense? And so, it's one reason, once you check the nut, since he doesn't want a replacement nut, then we probably won't be going dead flat with his neck, which we really don't want to anyway. I like to have a little bit of relief in the neck. Let it breathe, it sounds better. Not 10 thousandths, I don't necessarily like 10 thousandths, unless I'm playing on a really light gauge string. Light gauge strings are gonna spin because you naturally can just instantly pick it harder. It's gonna spin more. So if you run an electric with 8s, you may have to run 10 thousandths relief, or even 9s. You know, they get spanky sounding. You start getting into 10s, it starts to clear up. If you have somebody who's really heavy-handed, try to talk them into having 12s on their electric guitar. Why not? They're usually used to playing acoustic guitars anyway. I might change mine to 12s, see if I can handle it, see if I can grow up in hand.
So that thousandths, was it measured across the strings or down the neck? That thousandth difference
The thousandth difference?
is across the strings?
Yeah, I'm going, yeah, from one string to the
So you're
next.
starting off on the bass string and going
Yeah,
down.
so what I'm doing is I'm taking my gauge, and you can do this with a feeler gauge, but sliding the feeler gauge in there. Holding it. When I put it on the string, I take it and I zero it out.
Right.
Hit the zero out button, and then I press down, and then it'll tell me it's 23.
And that's measuring from the bottom of the string to the top of the
At
fret.
the top of the fret, that gap there.
And the reason for the difference, because the smaller strings don't swing as much?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm glad you said that. And then typically, that's how we set up all guitars. You're gonna have higher string action on the low side and taper down to a shorter string action on the high side. It tapers. So, if you were looking down the bottom of the neck, and again, at the end, then you cut the strings, you would have, and they would slightly taper
Yeah, I
and
got
go
it.
down.
That makes sense.
And the goal would be is to have this going on as the same radius as your fingerboard. And so you're basically just taking two of the same radiuses, but arching one a slightly different way. And attempt it like that is the goal. Sometimes you don't want that. You know, there's no set rules on how a setup has to be. These are just what I found that most people, once it's done, like. And what I generally. So let's talk about slotting a nut. The first thing I learned real quick when I started making nuts was that I would slot them and everything would be hunky-dory. And then a week later, the customer would come back and they'd be like, my nut's buzzing. I'm like, it can't be. That's impossible. It's not worn that much. And then sure enough, they would bring it in and they would pick that string and I could hear it buzz. I just said, what is going on? It didn't take me too long after about 4 nuts to figure out that that what happens when you we're gonna look at a nut. I'm gonna draw it from this angle, and pretending that we're looking into the nut slot. Try to be nice and neat. Here's our nut, magnified. Here's our fingerboard, our first fret. All right, So let's pretend that that's the bottom of our slide, okay? And this is the part that's sticking up. We're looking through it, so we can see the bottom of the slide from the side. Does all that make sense? Okay. So that string is coming off of that peg head. There's our tuner with that hole in it. Comes up and it ramps up, right? Because, so you always want to take that string, that's not a good representation, it kind of just slowly rounds down. So you're getting a false reading up here. So I'm slotting that nut, and I didn't compensate for the fact that a new set of strings on a guitar is going to ramp up over that nut, and it's going to read totally different. And we'll see that when I put a new set of strings on a guitar. You'll read higher the nut. So if you're measuring here, you keep hogging down this, then everything seems fine. The customer gets their guitar, or you finish your nut, and you're playing your guitar, and a week later, you keep playing that first fret, it eventually flattens this out when it comes off the nut, and you're a lot lower, and you start buzzing on that first fret.
So as strings set in, they tend to settle, is that what that?
Yeah, so you want to pre-settle it. It's real simple, you just take it and, see, I don't know how old this set of strings is, or if he's ever done it. I'm reading 23. I'm gonna press it right down there at the nut,
Like behind the nut?
right in front, right here. I'm gonna press it right there. And I'm reading 19,000ths of an inch.
Wow.
Right where I wanna be. So if I would've slotted that without doing that, we'd be in trouble.
But that's because the string is dropping down and slide a little bit.
No, that's because at the end of this,
String hadn't been.
it's not seating all the way. I mean, it's touching the end of the nut, but it's, since you have a back neck angle, like a Fender's not gonna do it as much. Fenders still have some angle because they have string trees and then, you know, the fingerboard is elevated. But you're gonna, what it's doing is there's your nut. I mean, the top of your nut, and that string's coming off, and when it takes off that point, it ramps up. So when you press it right here in front of the nut, it makes it take off straight, which will eventually happen if you play.
Oh, I got you.
If you're playing there a lot. And so that gives you a different reading. And that was 4,000ths of an inch. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is when it comes to a guitar right there at the nut, since the tolerances are so close.
So ideally, if you were doing that, you would set it up using dead strings versus putting the fresh.
No, you do it, you put your new strings on there. And then just make sure that they're seated. They do that here at the saddle too. So, you know, I need to press here because they'll ramp over a saddle and kind of just arch up. Instead of coming up and then, you know, they'll eventually settle in. There's a bunch of, those are different parts of a guitar that actually settles in when you put new strings on. And you know how you're always going out of tune when you put new strings on? There's a bunch of different spots in the guitar that's going on. You got those, which you'll notice maybe change just a few cents when you press that down. Most of it's coming from your tuner. Now it's not slipping or anything crazy like that unless you actually got some sort of issue with the gear, which is rare. I don't see it a whole lot. People always want their guitar goes out of tune, so it's like, I gotta get locking tuners, Well, I don't particularly care for locking tuners because I can't control my break angle, and we'll get into that when we start talking about Fenders. Fenders, we can control the break angle by how many wraps we put down coming off of that nut. The only reason I can see for having where a locking tuner would help with tuning is with a tremolo, and not because it's stopping the string from slipping anywhere. What it's doing is, imagine if you got a post and you got a lot of wraps around that post for a normal tuner. And when you use the trim and that string gets slack in it, it's going to get slack all around all those wrappings. And then when your trim comes back up, they may not all slide back where they're gonna go because they've got a wrapping around it. And those wrappings wanna grab each other. Those wrappings also wanna grab different spots in the nut and at the bridge, and those will cause tuning issues, especially with trim. It'll cause tuning issues with a guitar that doesn't have a trim. Imagine if when you're slot, we're gonna go into this when we file a nut. I'm getting in a situation where this guitar may not actually need a setup. It was just other than the truss rod adjustment. We'll find out here soon if I need to make any adjustments to it. Like when we slide a nut, people come in, my guitar won't stay in tune. I play my guitar at the beginning of the song. I tune it, and then at the end of the song, it's out of tune. One string will be sharp, or one string will be flat, typically. And then it's like out of tune, or I get to the end, and that same string will be sharp, you know. And that's most likely because it's sticking in a nut slot. And these are all running smooth. And you can kind of check, like if you take a string that's not fitting a slot properly, and it doesn't go back down to pitch, then that means when you pressed it through that slot, it grabs somewhere, so it's different. So let's say you're playing the guitar, you got it in tune, you bend the string, you come back down, and at the end of the song you're out of tune. That's because you pressed the string up, it had to slide through the slot, and then it caught, and it stayed there. So now you're flat. And then you may go back and then tune, and you've tuned other strings, maybe depending on that string, so you maybe didn't change it, maybe you thought your A was out, so you tuned it a little bit, then you start playing, and that D string jumped back where it was, and then all of a sudden, it's gonna have a different pitch, everything's gonna sound like it's going out of tune, and you're just chasing it. And it's all because of it sticking in the nut. And then it'll wreak havoc on if you've got a tremolo, you know, it can't slide through anything. Yeah, you need a Floyd Rose and everything gets locked, and that's what they were trying to do with Floyd Rose, is just eliminate everything, you know. And then, but Floyd Roses are tough, and
You ever put graphite slots or anything like that?
yeah, graphite, I typically don't, I use Vaseline. But only because it doesn't look black and nasty. Like if you were coming to me and you wanted me to make you a new nut, and I get finished polishing it out and everything looks, you know, really pretty, and then I just put a whole bunch of black stuff in it. It just looks gross. But it's easy because you can throw a pencil in your case and then sharpen the lead and then just rub it into the nut slots, and it helps to lube it because that graphite will lube the nut. I use Vaseline because it's clear. I just don't get it on any of the guitar, although I don't think it would matter. It's a petroleum product. Most guitars are nitro. I mean, I think even old like Model A's, I think the guy I work with, Bob, his Model A is nitro.
For those that don't play electric guitar, what he's talking about is on electric guitar, these crazy bars at the end that actually loosen the strings to adjust the pitch of it.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that
Your Floyd, yeah.
Wobble tail roof top.
Whammy bar. That's what my dad used to call it. It's like, I ain't getting you one of those whammy bar guitars. I got an old Gibson in the closet, which now I play it.
What about those like GraphTech ones? Because I've had success with that.
Like what?
Those like GraphTech ones. I have one of them on one of my guitars that has a vibrola on it, and it
Uh-huh.
stays in tune. Do you experience? Is that pretty good too?
I think that they're fine. As long as nut slots are cut right. A lot of these materials are made for, you know, if you don't get a nut slot cut correctly.
Yeah.
Because it's not an easy thing to do. And, you know, some guitars, it's almost impossible. I mean, you get Gretsches and guitars like that where you have you know, where a string wants to, have a back neck angle, and then it wants to shoot way off into a direction. You've got a lot of points there that are binding. And the crazy thing is almost most of your Gretsches are known for having Bigsby's and things like that, but they have a terrible headstock design. You know, probably the best headstock design is going to be like, you know, a Paul Reed Smith. All those strings come straight off the nut. There's not a huge back neck angle. and there's no string trees. String trees cause a problem. And, so, I'm gonna have to do some exciting based on the city.
Jason, this is off topic, but since you're talking about tenders a minute ago, there's obviously if you go online, you read, something, one person's gonna like this, one person's gonna like that. But it seems like, generally speaking, the more expensive guitars, acoustic guitars, tend to have the lightweight, open back style tenors versus the heavier Grover tenors. What's your opinion on like the weight of the tenor versus as far as the tone and everything?
I don't
What's your
know.
opinion of that?
It's a tough one for me, because I'm partial to, on acoustics, weight release, I mean, there was a period of time where you would hear people saying, you want heavy tuners on guitars, because it'll,
Sustain.
yeah, I don't know, I don't have much of an opinion, I've got tuners, I got preferences.
What kind of slotted heads?
I love slotted head stocks. I
Straight
hate
in.
string slotted peg heads. It makes almost too much, because you've got more back and neck angle on a slotted peg head. So we all know what a slotted peg head is, right? Anybody does it? Okay. And if you don't know something, just stop me, because I don't want someone to not know something I'm talking about, and so I don't want you to get lost. And the thing I learned is there's no dumb questions, there's just dumb answers. So
No, I got students that ask dumb questions. I tell them, ask a question that you don't know the answer to, not that you already know the answer to.
my sister did ask me one time, what part of the pig does turkey come from? When she was eating the turkey sandwich. But she caught it real quick. She was like, wait a minute, never mind.
When we're talking about tuners, what's the difference in a 1:18 ratio as opposed to a 1:21 ratio tuner? What?
So I guess your ratio is gonna be like, every time a tuner, for when you turn it, like a 1-to-1 ratio would be a violin peg. So where the hole is, when you turn it, that's where the hole goes. So that means, what would that mean if it was an 18-to-1? You would turn it 18 times before the hole would get back
So a
around.
1:21 is
It's finer.
It's a finer tuner.
Yeah. And, they make tuners now, a whole way to like 1-to-40?
Really?
Something crazy like that, which I would hate to have.
I know.
Tune your guitar.
Change the string a little bit.
That's the one good thing about violins, is somebody wants to bring a violin, I can tune it fast. Restring it fast too.
Strings on takes forever to get them up this tightness.
Slot peg heads. Slot peg heads are, we're gonna draw one. We're looking at the face of the peg head. There's the nut. They have 2 slots in them.
Oh, okay.
And the strings go and the tuners go here.
Like a classical.
Yeah, like a classical guitar.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, which, that means you got more of a break angle than any other tuner. Tuning headstock, typically, unless it's a shallow break angle. So those will cause tuning issues too in a lot of cases. But the good thing about a slotted peg head is you can control the angle somewhat of what the string comes off of the nut. So let's say you had a regular tuner and the machines are over here. This one's coming off fairly straight, this one's got a little bit of an angle, this one's got a lot of an angle. Well, let's pretend it's not like that. It's a slotted peg head. We've got these. So you could, here's the hole, hole, hole. You can take this one, I'm sorry, you can take this one and make the wraps go this way. You can take this one and choose to go whichever way to keep that string going a certain direction. And this one, you might opt to wrap all the way towards that direction. So you can keep your strings that, you can somewhat control your angle coming off the nut. And the reason you want the least amount of angle coming off of a nut is to keep less binding in the nut slot. You know, if you got a nut slot, there's the slot, here's the nut, and this is the finger facing the fingerboard. If that's coming off and then has to take off way over there, we got a pretty big binding issue right there. The other thing to consider when making a slotted peg head is if it had a tuning machine there and there's the nut, we're looking at the side of it again. This goes here, but in a slotted one, here it is, and then the tuner's coming off the back, so that string has to go that direction. We still have the same peg head angle, but we have a lot more downwards pressure on the neck. That can also start to do some issues, what we were talking about earlier with that dip that I seem to get when you have more of a headstock angle. It's like, you know, some guitars, it doesn't do it on all, it's almost like this downward pressure changes other stuff in the neck. You can see it a lot more if you're using a neck jig with gauges. I won't really get into that unless people really want to get into neck jigs. I can.
Well, excuse me. When you were drawing it, see from above the slot and the string going off to the angle, can you angle the back of the slot?
Yeah, you can. No, I prefer to just open up the whole slot with a bigger gauge file. And so
The
hopefully
whole slot, so the string.
No,
goes around in?
not the front of it.
Just the back.
I'll show you.
Okay.
We'll see what happens when I press the strings down the rest of this. Alright, so our A just turned to 17. Remember, we would want a 19, 18, you know, and 15. Yeah, G stayed at 14. I think that G had settled. The B is 16 and 14. So we don't need to adjust the nut. Remember how high it was earlier?
Yeah.
I pressed all those strings down. We don't really need to adjust this person's nut. Because we just want to press down.
You don't want the B lower?
Yeah, I'm going to adjust that B, but just by a tad.
You're starting the low E at 19, not 18?
Yeah, and that's 1/1000th there. I probably won't slide it just for that 1/1000th of an inch. I run the risk of going even lower, which would be okay. I've seen them as low as like 14/1000ths of an inch to be fine.
On the IE or low E?
On the low E?
Low.
On the low E, which starts to get pretty low, but it depends on the player. Now, we're still pretty much the same at the 12th fret. Those few thousandths didn't change very much. So now I'm at, still I'm at the 7/64s, tapered down to 5/64s. So I'm gonna take that saddle out, and then I'll check the radius compared to the neck of this guitar. And I'm not going to take the strings completely off the guitar, because I want to get them back on fairly quick. And if you ever want to treat yourselves to something really nice, that's the string winder.
Looks like a woodcraft kit.
How much are the Jason?
You can get one for about, I'm shipping it all about $100. Frank Ford makes it. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Frank Ford.
Yeah, but what about those little electric ones?
Yeah, those are fine, but you won't want them to touch this. And Frank Ford, he machines those out at his house, you know, he's a machinist. It's even at an angle, like so it follows your wrist, it's quite amazing.
It's like those offset screwdrivers, the electricians.
Yeah. Right. So.
Oh, yeah.
Do they make them for like bases too?
Bases they don't, but they make 3 different sizes. They make them for mandolins. You know, I always just get the large size, and we go from there. I'm trying not to lose parts and bring a dish.
Are you gonna keep up which pin came up with string, or you not? Okay,
Not on this guitar.
okay.
I know all these are the same.
Are those metal?
I think they're liquid metal.
Yeah, I don't. This is something that he installed in his.
What's your preferred?
Now, my goal is to, in that Gibson over there, when we start working on it, is to, I want to install some solid shaft pins. I'm a big fan of solid shaft pins.
Are they not solid shaft normally? Or slot?
They got a slot in them. There's
Oh.
most of them have a slot. You know,
What's your preferred material?
You know, I used to say, well, I used to say it doesn't matter tons, you know, but ebony would be my preference. And people would always say, you know, you need to use solid shaft pins because they give you a better tone. And I don't know if I could ever tell the difference. I do it because of the health of the bridge plate.
Yeah.
And then the material, you know, I was like, I don't know how much of a difference. A lot of it I have a problem with, because when someone brings me a guitar, I've got like 10 or 15 minutes of playtime at most with it before I start working on it. Otherwise, I'd just be playing guitar all day long. And then I hear so many guitars that I can't remember what the guitar completely sounded like when I started and when I'm finished.
Yeah.
So for me to tell someone, you should put this pin in over that pin, I usually don't, because the honest truth is I don't know. And I don't know what it's going to be like, what their ear is going to hear either. But I will tell people that what I prefer is typically boned. And for most of the time, I would say just switch your bridge pins out with something solid, something that you can readily get the same kind, so you can just swap them out. That's why I like Waverly pins. You can get from Stu Mac. They're all perfect, nice 5 degree. You fit them. You can go ahead and cut your guitar for solid shaft pins, and then you can just order a set of every one of them. And you can just sit there and experiment. You could probably, and I want to do this when I have more time, take one of my guitars that I'm used to playing with, and then put an ebony one here, put a ivory one there, we'll put a bone one in the next one, and then we'll see, and then switch them around. And maybe you could take a guitar that maybe the D string doesn't sound too strong to you, make it stronger. Who knows? And then, with all that said, that's what I usually tell people. But then one day I had a Gibson in the shop that someone put brass bridge pins in, these metal ones. And it sat on the wall forever. I was embarrassed to tell people, you need to buy that Gibson, because I just didn't like it. I didn't like the way it sounded. And one guy came in and goes, that's the guitar I want. I love it. I said, well, let me put the new strings in it. Let me take those brass bridge pins out, because they just look gaudy to me. And so I put new strings on it, cleaned up the frets. I put ebony ones in there. And that guitar came to life. And I was like, I've had this guitar sitting in the shop for, 6 months now. Just been sitting here because we just never push it off on anybody because we don't like it. And we could have just changed the bridge pins. And so I think that those brass bridge pins were not like people used to say, where they would enhance your guitar. What I think was going on was, when you have a violin or a banjo, for y'all, they sell pieces of brass that go on top of your bridge to mute it out. Mm-hmm. That's how we stay married if you're a banjo player. You take clothespins or something and then clip it onto your bridge, and it'll mute it puts mass there on your bridge and it mutes it out. And I think of those big honking bridge pins, and these maybe too, because they're metal and they're heavy. It may be taking some of it
Carry on
out.
top.
And maybe you would want that. You know, maybe you got a guitar that's just, you know, harsh. Usually for me, I mean, a guitar can be as loud as it possibly can be. I'm totally fine with it. And when I get into banjos, I don't like them to be harsh, and you know, I like them to be mellow. But that's my style of playing because I'm not a bluegrass player. All right, so now I've got this off. We were at 4/64, so don't want to change. You know, I like that. 7/64, I want to come down. I want to come down to 6/64. So I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. I've got to figure out one, if I, you know, want to use a saddle. I mean, he's got a bone nut. I don't know why they chose, this is factory. Well, I know why they chose to, because you can injection mold this and you slap them in guitars and move on down the line. One, I want to check the radius and make sure it matches. And when I have a compound radius, I usually try to match right at the 12th fret, whatever radius this is. That's the radius I want on here. So let's pretend that this was like a 20 radius, and then and we've got a tighter radius at the 12th. Then instead of taking any material off the bottom, I may just opt to reprofile the top and change the radius. Try not to get in over here. And maybe I will. He's got some divots there, or maybe I want it all. Maybe I'll try it, and we might cut him a new saddle. I don't know. I'm going to find out. And so this is a nut vise. Seems like it needs a little bit of oil. So this is kind of crazy. I use a vise to hold a vise. And that's just because it was, I'm used to this setup at the shop. I can loosen this up here, and this will rotate. This is kind of a neat vise because it'll come off and clamp it this direction too if you wanted to. The problem with using a vise inside a vise is, I'm used to using this. So I'll put a nut in here, and then I'm going to take the nut out real quick, and I'll grab that, and boom, bam! That happens a lot. If I'm clumsy with this, that's the reason. Yeah. All right, so I need to take the material off, and I need to get there. So I got the nut where I want to. I don't think that the nut height's going to change very much, me moving my bass side. And it's all, of course, one piece. So we're going to drop. We got two choices. We can carve this into the top. We can carve it into the bottom. If my radius is the same, I might just carve it into the bottom and go from there. And so I've got radius gauges, and I've bought some radius gauges from StewMac before, and I bought them on Amazon. I literally just trashed some that I got because of the kind that go under the saddle, because I bought a set for like real cheap on Amazon, and I compared it to a fingerboard that I knew was 9.5, and then I checked it with a nicer StewMac gauge, and it was 9.5, and then those gauges were telling me that it was something like 12 or something like that. So I just trashed them, you know. So some things might not be a good idea to buy. We're gonna find out what this is. I told y'all 16 earlier. I'm measuring 16 there, or what looks to be. And this may be a 16 all the way down. It's a modern day Martin. We're not doing this. They're not compound radiuses. I don't know, we could look this up, but I'm not sure what year this is. But Martin did a good job with keeping up with serial numbers, so you can look Martin's serial numbers up quick. You can go online and just type it in. So that's 16 radius. I'm gonna check the top of my saddle. About a 16 radius. So, we'll opt to take this off the bottom. So we know that we take our action card, we can say 1/64 of an inch is what we need to get this at the 12th fret down only on the low E side. And that's gonna affect these other strings, but they follow the arc, so they're gonna drop where they need to be too. And we wanna keep the high E as close to 4/64 as possible. So in order to do that, the math to that is whatever you want to take off here, you have to double it here. You know, so if you wanted to take a 1/64 of an inch off of your action at the 12th fret, you're going to want your action to take it off twice that amount on the saddle. Does that make sense?
Should be a 30-second with the saddle. if it's
Yeah,
a
we have 30-second.
Wow.
They're 2/64s. Now we don't want to take any off our height, so that means we're going to take this off the bottom. We're going to have an angle there. Okay. So what I'm going to do, if I didn't have certain tools, I'm going to say 15. What we say 64th is actually 15. 0.0156, so I'm going to say 16. So I'm going to set this at 32 thousandths, which is nice because it's 32nd of an inch.
Yeah, before you start into that, you wanna break for lunch?
Yeah,
Next
y'all
year,
hungry?
Before you start, cause that can be pretty elaborate, doing all that.
Yeah, we'll do that.
You wanna do that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Y'all hungry?